empire, methodically, with precision, and on solid ground. At 42, he commanded respect from contractors across 3 states. His company, Bright Foundations, known for projects that stood the test of time. His calloused hands and sharp mind had carved success from nothing, starting with a single truck and ending with a fleet of equipment worth millions. The suburban mansion in Westfield wasn't just his home. It was his monument. Every beam, every nail, every carefully planned detail reflected the man who refused to accept anything less than perfection. His wife Carol had decorated it with expensive tastes that Mitchell indulged, believing a successful man should provide the best for his family. Mitchell's relationship with Carol Pitts had begun 15 years ago at a charity auction. She was 25 then, working as an event coordinator with honey blonde hair and a smile that could light up boardrooms. He was 27, already showing promise in construction, his dark eyes intense with ambition. Their courtship was swift. Carol appreciated security, and Mitchell appreciated beauty and grace. "You're going to be something special," Carol had whispered on their wedding night. "I can feel it." Their daughter Sarah arrived 2 years later, a perfect blend of Mitchell's determination and Carol's charm. Now 13, she was Mitchell's pride, intelligent, athletic, with her father's unflinching honesty and her mother's social ease. But perfection, Mitchell had learned, was a fragile thing. The first crack appeared 6 months ago. Carol had started working late at her boutique downtown, Elegance and Style, which she'd opened 5 years earlier with Mitchell's backing. She hired Derek Todd as a store manager, a smooth-talking man in his mid-30s with an easy smile and expensive clothes that somehow fit perfectly on a retail salary. Mitchell had met Derek twice. Both times, something about the man's overly firm handshake and too long eye contact with Carol set Mitchell's instincts on edge. But he'd built his fortune by trusting his judgment about people, not paranoia. "Derek's been invaluable," Carol would say during dinner, her eyes brightening in a way that used to be reserved for Mitchell alone. "The sales numbers have never been better." Mitchell noticed other changes. Carol's phone, once left casually on counters, now stayed glued to her hand. She developed sudden interest in yoga classes that ran until 9 p.m. Their bedroom conversations, once filled with shared dreams, became polite exchanges about schedules and household logistics. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March. Mitchell had returned early from a job site meeting, hoping to surprise Carol with dinner reservations at their favorite restaurant, the place where he'd proposed. The house was empty except for Sarah, who was in her room working on algebra homework. "Where's your mom?" Mitchell asked, loosening his tie. "Store meeting," Sarah replied without looking up from her textbook. She said she'd be really late tonight. Something cold settled in Mitchell's chest. He called the store earlier to confirm dinner plans. No answer. Now he knew why. Over the next 3 weeks, Mitchell conducted surveillance with the same methodical precision he applied to construction projects. He hired Roger Valencia, a former police detective who now ran a private investigation firm. The photos Roger delivered were crisp, damning evidence. Carol and Derek entering a downtown hotel, leaving Derek's apartment on Tuesday afternoons, sharing intimate dinners at restaurants 50 miles from town. But Mitchell was a strategic man. He didn't confront them immediately. Instead, he began documenting everything: finances, communications, schedules. He discovered Carol had opened a secret credit card, charging expensive gifts that never made it home. Derek, meanwhile, had a history of relationships with married women and a credit report that suggested a man living beyond his means. The game had changed, but Mitchell Bright had always been better at playing the long game than his opponents realized. His investigation revealed that Derek wasn't just pursuing Carol for romance. The man had gambling debts, serious ones. Mitchell's contacts in the construction world had connections everywhere, including people who knew about Derek's weekend poker games that had spiraled into $30,000 losses to very dangerous individuals. Mitchell realized he wasn't just dealing with infidelity. He was looking at predators who saw his family as their solution. That night, Mitchell sat in his study until dawn, surrounded by photographs and financial records, planning his response with the same careful attention he'd give to a 50-story foundation. Some structures, he knew, needed to be demolished completely before rebuilding could begin. The question wasn't whether he would act. The question was how completely he would destroy them. Chapter 2. The Web Titans. 2 months after discovering the betrayal, Mitchell had transformed into someone even his closest business associates wouldn't recognize. During the day, he maintained his routine, job sites, meetings, family dinners where he played the loving, unsuspecting husband. But his evenings belonged to preparation. Mitchell's home office, which Carol rarely entered, became his war room. Hidden behind false panels in his desk were dossiers on Derek Todd and his associates, financial records, and surveillance equipment that would make federal agents envious. Roger Valencia continued providing intelligence, but Mitchell's own investigation had revealed depths to Derek's character that went beyond simple adultery. Derek Todd wasn't just a store manager with gambling problems. Through careful investigation of his employment history, Mitchell discovered a pattern. Derek targeted women in comfortable marriages, particularly those with access to business finances. His previous relationships had ended with mysterious business loans that were never repaid and partnerships that dissolved under questionable circumstances. Carol wasn't Derek's first mark. She was just his most ambitious target. Mitchell's construction empire provided perfect cover for his activities. His projects required extensive background checks on subcontractors, giving him legitimate reasons to access financial databases. His relationships with city officials, built over 2 decades of reliable work, opened doors that might otherwise remain closed. During a Thursday evening, when Carol claimed to be attending a retail conference in the state capitol, Mitchell followed them to Derek's apartment. Through borrowed surveillance equipment, officially rented for security surveys at construction sites, he recorded conversations that revealed the true scope of their betrayal. "She trusts you completely." Derek's voice came through the receiver, tinny but clear. "The business accounts, the investment portfolio, she has access to everything." "I can't just transfer money, Derek," Carol replied, her voice carrying a calculating edge Mitchell had never heard before. "Mitchell isn't stupid. He watches everything." "Then we make him not want to watch," Derek said. "Create problems at home. Make him focus on other things. I've done this before, baby." Rich husbands get sloppy when their world starts falling apart. Mitchell sat in his truck outside Derek's apartment building, listening to his wife of 15 years plan his financial destruction with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. But what followed chilled him even further. "What about Sarah?" Carol asked. "Kids adapt," Derek replied dismissively. "She'll be fine with whatever story we tell her. Besides, once we're set up properly, we won't need to worry about Bright's opinions on custody arrangements." That night, Mitchell made a decision that would alter the trajectory of everything that followed. His investigation expanded beyond Derek and Carol to include Derek's associates, the people he owed money to, his family members, and most importantly, his previous victims. Through Roger Valencia's contacts, Mitchell located Patricia Elder, Derek's former target from 2 years earlier. Patricia had lost her marriage, her bakery business, and nearly her home before discovering Derek's true nature. She lived now in a small apartment across town, working double shifts at a medical clinic to rebuild her life. Mitchell met Patricia at a coffee shop on a rainy Sunday afternoon, introducing himself as a concerned citizen who'd encountered Derek in a business context. "He has a system," Patricia explained, her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup. "He finds women who have access to money but feel neglected. He's patient, months of building trust, making them feel special again. Then he starts asking for small favors. Business loans that never get repaid. Access to accounts for temporary problems. By the time you realize what's happening, you're in too deep to just walk away." "What stopped you?" Mitchell asked. Patricia's laugh was bitter. "My husband hired a private investigator. Found out Derek had done the same thing to 3 other women in our area. But the damage was done. Tom couldn't forgive the betrayal, financial and personal. The business was ruined, and the marriage." She shrugged. "Some things can't be rebuilt." Mitchell left that meeting with something beyond anger. He had clarity. Derek Todd was a professional predator, and Carol had become his willing accomplice. They weren't just threatening his marriage. They were threatening his daughter's future, his life's work, and everything he'd built through decades of honest labor. Over the following weeks, Mitchell began implementing a strategy that would leverage his construction empire, his reputation, and his knowledge of both Derek and Carol's vulnerabilities. He started by quietly transferring assets into protected accounts, securing his daughter's college fund and his business operations from potential theft. But protection was only the first phase. Mitchell Bright had learned long ago that some foundations needed to be demolished completely before new structures could be built. Derek and Carol had made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the man they were betraying. Chapter 3. The Trigger. 3 months into Mitchell's careful preparation, the game accelerated beyond his control in the worst possible way. It was a Thursday afternoon when his phone rang with a call that would transform methodical planning into immediate, brutal action. "Mr. Bright, this is Memorial Hospital. Your daughter Sarah has been admitted to the emergency room." Mitchell's world compressed to a single point of white-hot focus. He left his job site immediately, ignoring the shouted questions from his foreman, and drove to the hospital with precision born from years of navigating crisis situations. Sarah lay in the hospital bed looking smaller than her 13 years, her left side wrapped in bandages, her face pale but alert. Dr. Julia Rankin, the attending physician, met Mitchell in the hallway before he entered the room. "2 broken ribs," Dr. Rankin explained, her voice professional but concerned. "Some bruising on her back and shoulders. The pattern suggests she was slammed against a solid surface, probably a wall. She's been asking for you." Mitchell entered Sarah's room with the controlled calm that had served him through decades of managing complex projects. But inside, a cold fury was building that went beyond anything he'd felt during months of discovering Carol's betrayal. "Dad," Sarah whispered as he took her hand. Her voice was steady, but Mitchell could see the fear she was trying to hide. "I need to tell you something, and you have to promise not to get mad." "I'm not mad at you, sweetheart. Tell me what happened." Sarah's story emerged in careful pieces. She'd gone to the boutique after school to surprise her mother, wanted to show her an A+ on her science project. The store was officially closed, but she'd seen lights in the back office and used the spare key Carol had given her for emergencies. "Mom was there with Derek," Sarah continued, her voice growing smaller. They were kissing and stuff. When they saw me, Mom got really upset, but Derek got angry." Mitchell's hands remained gentle on his daughter's, but every muscle in his body was coiling with controlled violence. "Derek grabbed my arm and dragged me to the back room," Sarah said. "He slammed me against the wall and said if I told you what I saw, he'd kill you. He said Mom needed to choose between her old life and her new one, and I was just making things complicated." The final piece of Sarah's account struck Mitchell like a physical blow. "Mom just stood there, Dad. She didn't stop him. She didn't help me. She just kept saying, 'This is all too much. This is too much.'" After Sarah had escaped and called for help from a neighbor, Carol had apparently coached her to claim she'd fallen downstairs at school. The hospital staff had immediately recognized the injuries as assault-related, not accidental trauma. Dr. Rankin later confided to Mitchell that Sarah had initially tried to maintain the false story, but broke down when medical evidence clearly contradicted her account. "She's protecting someone," the doctor had said, "but whoever hurt her needs to face consequences." Mitchell spent the evening at Sarah's bedside, helping her with homework and watching her favorite movies on the hospital television, maintaining the appearance of a concerned father dealing with an unfortunate accident. But internally, he was recalibrating every plan. Derek Todd had crossed the line from financial predator to child abuser. Carol had witnessed the assault and chosen to cover it up rather than protect their daughter. That night, after Sarah fell asleep, Mitchell sat in the hospital chair and made a series of phone calls. He called his lawyer about emergency custody measures. He called Roger Valencia about immediate surveillance of Derek's movements. And he called his brother-in-law Albert Greenwood, who ran a security consulting firm and had connections that operated in legal gray areas. "Albert," Mitchell said quietly into the phone, "I need the kind of help that doesn't leave paperwork trails." "What happened, Mitch?" "Someone hurt Sarah, and they threatened to kill me if she talked." There was a long pause before Albert responded. "I'll be there in 2 hours." Don't do anything until I arrive. But Mitchell had already made his decision. The methodical, legal approach he'd been planning for months was no longer sufficient. Derek Todd had made it personal in a way that demanded immediate, permanent resolution. Carol had made her choice by standing aside while their daughter was assaulted. Now Mitchell would show them both what happened when someone threatened his child. The careful game was over. The war was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Hunt Begins. Albert Greenwood arrived at the hospital at midnight, his appearance as unremarkable as his business required. Average height, forgettable features, and clothes that could blend into any crowd. But Mitchell knew his brother-in-law's background. 10 years in military intelligence followed by 15 years running security consultations for clients who needed problems solved quietly. They met in the hospital parking garage, away from cameras and curious ears. "Tell me everything," Albert said without preamble. Mitchell laid out the full scope of Derek and Carol's betrayal, from the financial planning to Sarah's assault. Albert listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "The daughter's safety is priority one," Albert said finally. "Everything else can wait. She's safe here tonight. Hospital security, and I've arranged private protection through your people starting tomorrow." Albert nodded approvingly. "Good. Now, about your problem with Todd. I assume you want this handled permanently?" Mitchell's response came without hesitation. "Derek Todd hurt my daughter and threatened to kill me. Carol helped cover it up. I want them to understand that some actions have consequences that can't be negotiated away." "Understood. But we do this smart, Mitch. You've built too much to throw it away on revenge, no matter how justified." Over the next 3 days, while Sarah recovered at home under the protection of Albert's carefully selected security team, Mitchell and Albert developed a strategy that would destroy Derek and Carol's lives as thoroughly as they had attempted to destroy his. The first phase targeted Derek's vulnerabilities. Through Albert's connections, they identified Derek's gambling debts in detail. $38,000 owed to Miguel Noble, who ran high-stakes poker games for clients who didn't accept payment plans. Miguel's collection methods were both effective and permanent. Albert arranged a meeting with Miguel at a construction site Mitchell owned on the outskirts of town. Miguel arrived with 2 associates, men whose presence suggested they were accustomed to handling problems that required physical solutions. "Your boy Derek Todd owes me money," Miguel said after Albert made introductions. "He's been avoiding my calls. We might be able to help with that," Mitchell replied. "But I need something in return." Miguel listened with interest as Mitchell explained Derek's assault on Sarah and his threats. In Miguel's world, men who hurt children occupied a special category of targets. "You want him scared or you want him gone?" Miguel asked bluntly. "I want him to understand that actions have consequences," Mitchell said carefully. "But I also want it clean. No connections back to my family." Miguel smiled. "Derek's got a payment meeting with me tomorrow night. Maybe he'll have an accident on the way home. Maybe his car breaks down in the wrong neighborhood. These things happen." Phase 2 targeted Carol's support system. Through Roger Valencia's investigation, Mitchell learned that Carol had been planning to leave him for months, moving money into accounts Derek could access and preparing to claim half of Mitchell's construction empire in divorce proceedings. But Carol's planning had a fatal flaw. She trusted Derek completely. And Derek, as Mitchell now knew, was a professional predator whose interest in Carol would evaporate the moment her access to Mitchell's money was threatened. Mitchell decided to accelerate their timeline. Working through Albert's connections, Mitchell arranged for Carol to receive what appeared to be an anonymous tip about Derek's history with other women. Photos of Derek with his previous targets, financial records showing his pattern of relationship-based theft, and testimony from Patricia Elder were compiled into a package that would shatter Carol's illusions about her lover's motives. The package was delivered to the boutique on a Friday afternoon when Derek was away meeting with suppliers. Mitchell watched from his truck across the street as Carol opened the envelope, saw her face go white as she processed the evidence, and then saw her make frantic phone calls that went unanswered. Derek, meanwhile, was dealing with his own crisis. Miguel's payment meeting had gone exactly as planned. Derek now understood that his gambling debts had become the least of his problems. Someone was actively hunting him, and his usual charm wouldn't provide protection. By Sunday evening, both Derek and Carol were in full panic mode, each believing they were under attack from unknown enemies, while unaware that their relationship was being deliberately torn apart from within. Mitchell maintained his facade of concerned husband and father, staying close to Sarah and avoiding any direct contact with Carol's growing paranoia. But he was systematically dismantling the life Carol and Derek had planned to steal from him. The real devastation was yet to come. Chapter 5. The Collapse. By Monday morning, Carol's world was disintegrating faster than she could comprehend. The anonymous package had revealed Derek's history with surgical precision: financial fraud, abandoned women, and most damaging, evidence that he'd been planning the same fate for her from the beginning. Mitchell watched from his study as Carol made increasingly desperate phone calls to Derek, who had disappeared entirely after his meeting with Miguel Noble. What Carol didn't know was that Derek was currently hiding in a motel 40 miles away, nursing a dislocated shoulder and trying to understand why dangerous men were suddenly hunting him. The beauty of Mitchell's strategy was its efficiency. He was using Derek and Carol's own betrayal as the weapon to destroy them. Tuesday afternoon brought the call Mitchell had been expecting. Carol finally reached Derek at his motel hideout, and their conversation, recorded through surveillance equipment Albert's team had placed in Derek's phone, revealed the complete collapse of their partnership. "You used me." Carol's voice came through the speaker in Mitchell's office. "All those women in the files, I was just another mark." "Baby, those files are fake," Derek replied, but his voice carried the desperation of a man whose lies were catching up to him. "Someone's trying to break us up. They want to keep us from being together." "The financial records aren't fake, Derek. The bank statements showing what you stole from Patricia Elder and the others, those are real." There was a long pause before Derek's response revealed his true character. "Look, Carol, maybe we should take a break. Things are getting complicated, and I've got some business problems to handle." "Business problems?" "Derek, I left my husband for you. I let you hurt my daughter to protect our secret. And now you want to take a break?" Mitchell's grip tightened on his coffee cup. Even facing complete exposure, Carol was more concerned about Derek abandoning her than about the assault on Sarah. Derek's final betrayal was swift and brutal. "Your daughter came to the store at the wrong time. That's not my fault. And honestly, Carol, you're not as valuable as you think you are. I can find other opportunities." The line went dead. Carol had been abandoned by her lover and left to face the consequences of their betrayal alone. Wednesday brought Carol's attempt at reconciliation. She appeared in Mitchell's office at the construction company, tears streaming down her face, prepared to confess everything in hopes of salvaging their marriage. "Mitchell, I've made terrible mistakes," she began. "Derek Todd. He manipulated me, made me believe things about our marriage that weren't true. I want to come home. I want to fix this." Mitchell looked up from his blueprints with the calm expression he'd perfected over months of deception. "What about Sarah?" Carol's face went white. "What do you mean?" "Sarah's injuries from last week. The assault that put her in the hospital. You were there, Carol. You watched Derek hurt our daughter, and you tried to cover it up." "I was scared," Carol whispered. "Derek said if I told the truth, he'd hurt you too. I was trying to protect everyone." Mitchell set down his pen and looked at his wife with the cold assessment he might give to a failed building foundation. "You protected Derek. You protected your secret. You sacrificed our daughter's safety to maintain your affair." "Mitchell, please." "No." The single word carried 15 years of marriage and the finality of absolute judgment. "You made your choice when you stood by and watched him assault Sarah. Everything after that is just consequences." Carol left his office understanding that their marriage was over, but she didn't yet understand how completely Mitchell intended to destroy the life she tried to steal from him. Thursday evening, Carol's destruction accelerated. Roger Valencia had spent weeks documenting every financial irregularity Carol had created. The secret credit cards, the business loans Derek had convinced her to approve, the money she'd moved to accounts Derek could access. The evidence was delivered to Carol's divorce attorney, along with a comprehensive report on Derek's criminal history. Carol discovered that filing for divorce wouldn't give her access to half of Mitchell's empire. Instead, her documented financial fraud and child endangerment meant she would be fighting to avoid criminal charges while losing everything she'd thought was guaranteed. Friday brought the final collapse. Derek Todd, desperate and abandoned, made the mistake of returning to town to retrieve money he'd hidden in the boutique. Miguel Noble's associates were waiting for him. The details of Derek's final encounter were handled discreetly, but the message was clear. Men who hurt children and threatened families face consequences that went beyond legal proceedings. Carol found Derek's body in the boutique Saturday morning. The official cause of death would be listed as a heart attack brought on by extreme stress, but Carol understood she was looking at the result of forces beyond her control or comprehension. By Sunday evening, Carol Bright had lost her lover, her marriage, her business, and any hope of the comfortable future she'd planned to steal. She was facing criminal charges, financial ruin, and the knowledge that her betrayal had cost her the only family she'd ever known. Mitchell, meanwhile, had protected his daughter, preserved his empire, and eliminated the threats to his family with the same methodical precision he brought to every construction project. Some foundations, he reflected, needed to be demolished completely before rebuilding could begin. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. In the weeks following Derek's death, Mitchell consolidated his victory with the same systematic approach he'd used to build his construction empire. Carol's attempt to claim half his assets in divorce proceedings had collapsed under the weight of evidence documenting her fraud and complicity in child endangerment. Sarah was recovering well, both physically and emotionally, under the care of Dr. Julia Rankin and a family therapist Albert had recommended. The 14-year-old had shown remarkable resilience, but Mitchell knew the betrayal by her mother would leave scars that required careful attention. "Dad," Sarah said one evening as they worked on her algebra homework, "why did Mom choose Derek over us?" Mitchell set down his pen and looked at his daughter with the same honesty he'd always given her. "Some people make choices based on what they want in the moment instead of what's right for the people they're supposed to protect. Your mother forgot that being a parent means putting your child's safety above everything else. Will she ever come back?" "No, sweetheart. Some choices can't be undone." Sarah nodded with a maturity that broke Mitchell's heart. "I understand. I just want to make sure you weren't going to change your mind and forgive her." Mitchell's response was immediate and firm. "I will never forgive anyone who hurts you or threatens our family. That's a promise." Carol's final attempt at reconciliation came through her attorney, offering to confess to fraud charges in exchange for supervised visitation with Sarah. Mitchell's response was delivered by his own legal team. Any attempt to contact Sarah would result in additional criminal charges and civil litigation that would leave Carol with nothing. The boutique had been closed permanently, its assets seized to pay debts Derek had created in restitution for his previous victims. Carol was living in a studio apartment across town, working at a discount retail store for minimum wage while awaiting trial on fraud charges that would likely result in prison time. Mitchell felt no satisfaction in her destruction, only the cold certainty that justice had been served. The investigation into Derek's death had concluded exactly as Albert had predicted. Derek Todd, a man with known gambling debts and a history of fraud, had suffered a fatal heart attack brought on by stress and poor health decisions. The case was closed without any connection to Mitchell or his associates. Miguel Noble had been particularly satisfied with the arrangement. "Men who hurt children don't deserve to worry about debt collection," he'd told Albert. "Some problems solve themselves." 3 months after Derek's death, Mitchell received an unexpected visitor. Patricia Elder appeared at his office on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a manila envelope. "Mr. Bright," she said, "I wanted to thank you for what you did." Mitchell maintained his careful expression. "I'm not sure what you mean." Patricia smiled sadly. "Derek Todd destroyed my life 2 years ago. When he died, I thought it was just random justice. But then I started hearing rumors about you, about what he'd done to your daughter. I realized someone had made sure he faced consequences for all the women he'd hurt." She placed the envelope on Mitchell's desk. "These are copies of financial records Derek stole from me. Evidence I was never able to use because I was too scared to fight him. I thought you might want them, in case anyone ever questions whether Derek Todd got what he deserved." Mitchell accepted the envelope without opening it. "What will you do now?" "Rebuild," Patricia said simply. "Just like you're doing." Some of us get second chances because other people make sure predators can't keep hunting. After Patricia left, Mitchell locked the envelope in his safe next to the other evidence of Derek and Carol's betrayal. He would never need the documentation, but its existence was a reminder that some victories required thorough preparation. That evening, Mitchell and Sarah had dinner at their favorite restaurant, the same place where he planned to take Carol on the night he discovered her betrayal. They talked about Sarah's plans for high school, her interest in engineering, and her determination to follow her father's example of building things that lasted. "Dad," Sarah said as they shared dessert, "do you think Mom ever really loved us?" Mitchell considered the question carefully. "I think your mother loved the idea of the life we could give her. But real love means protecting the people who matter most, even when it's difficult. Your mother chose the easy path instead of the right path." And Derek? Derek was a predator who saw our family as something he could exploit. He never loved anyone. He just used people until they were no longer valuable to him. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad they're gone." Mitchell reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "They can't hurt us anymore. That's what matters." As they drove home through the familiar streets of Westfield, past construction sites Mitchell's company had built in neighborhoods where families lived in houses his foundation supported, Mitchell reflected on the choices that had brought him to this moment. He had protected his daughter, preserved his empire, and eliminated threats to his family with the same precision he brought to every important project. Carol and Derek had underestimated the man they tried to destroy, and they'd paid the ultimate price for their betrayal. Some foundations, Mitchell knew, were built to last forever. Others needed to be demolished completely before new construction could begin. The choice between those outcomes always belonged to the people who decided whether to build or destroy. Chapter 7. New Foundations. 6 months after Derek's death, Mitchell's life had settled into a routine that balanced single parenthood with running his construction empire. Sarah was thriving. Her grades had improved, she'd joined the debate team, and she was showing genuine interest in the engineering principles Mitchell explained during their weekend visits to job sites. "The foundation is everything," Mitchell told Sarah as they watched his crew pour concrete for a new office complex. "If you build it right, everything else can withstand whatever storms come later." Sarah nodded, making notes in the engineering journal Mitchell had given her. At 14, she was already thinking about college applications and career paths that would let her build something lasting. Mitchell's relationship with his daughter had grown stronger through the crisis they'd survived together. Sarah understood that her father would never forgive betrayal, but she also knew his protection was absolute and unconditional. The lesson had shaped her character in ways that would serve her well in life. The legal proceedings against Carol had concluded with a plea agreement, 18 months in minimum security prison for fraud, followed by 5 years of probation. She would never again have unsupervised access to Sarah, and her financial obligations for restitution would keep her working low-wage jobs for the foreseeable future. Mitchell felt no sympathy for her situation. Carol had made her choices with full knowledge of the consequences. The fact that she'd misjudged the man she was betraying was simply poor planning on her part. But Carol's story wasn't finished. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, Roger Valencia called Mitchell with information that threatened to complicate their carefully constructed victory. "Carol's been talking," Roger said without preamble. "She's in county lockup pending transfer to state prison, and she's been telling other inmates about Derek's death. Claims it wasn't natural causes." Mitchell felt the familiar cold focus that had served him through months of planning and execution. "What exactly is she saying?" "She thinks you had Derek killed. She can't prove it, but she's convinced someone murdered him and made it look like a heart attack. The problem is, she's talking to women who have nothing to lose and connections to people who might listen. Is she a threat? Not directly, but if the wrong person decides to investigate Derek's death more carefully, they might find connections we'd prefer stay buried." Mitchell made his decision with the same efficiency he'd shown throughout the entire crisis. Set up a meeting. 3 days later, Mitchell visited Carol at the county detention center. She looked older than her 37 years. The stress of losing everything had aged her dramatically. When she saw Mitchell through the bulletproof glass, Her expression shifted between hope and fear. "You came," she said through the phone receiver. "I came to give you a choice," Mitchell replied. "The same kind of choice you gave Sarah when Derek was hurting her." Carol's face went white. "Mitchell, I know what you did to Derek. I know you had him killed. Derek Todd died of a heart attack. The medical examiner confirmed it. The case is closed. You know people. You have connections. You made it happen." Mitchell leaned forward slightly, his voice never rising above conversational level. "Carol, you have 18 months to think about your future. When you get out, you can rebuild your life quietly, or you can continue making accusations about things that didn't happen. But I want you to understand something very clearly." He paused, ensuring she understood the weight of his words. "Derek threatened to kill me if Sarah talked about what he did to her. You stood by and watched him assault our daughter. You chose to protect your affair instead of protecting her. Derek paid the price for threatening my family. The choice you make now will determine whether you pay a similar price." Carol's hands were shaking as she gripped the phone. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining consequences," Mitchell said calmly. "Derek thought he could hurt my daughter and threaten my life without facing justice. He was wrong. If you continue spreading lies about his death, you'll discover that some mistakes can't be corrected." The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. When Mitchell left the detention center, he was confident that Carol understood her position. She could serve her time quietly and rebuild what was left of her life, or she could continue challenging the man who'd already demonstrated his willingness to protect his family by any means necessary. Carol chose survival. The stories about Derek's death stopped circulating through the county jail, and Carol began focusing on the prison job training programs that might give her employable skills when she was released. That evening, Mitchell and Sarah celebrated her acceptance into an advanced placement engineering program with dinner at the restaurant where they'd become a family of two. Sarah had grown into a confident young woman who understood that strength and intelligence were the foundation of everything worthwhile in life. "Dad," Sarah said as they walked to the car, "I know Mom thinks you had Derek killed." Mitchell stopped walking and looked at his daughter with complete honesty. "What do you think?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I think Derek was the kind of person who made dangerous enemies. I think he died because he threatened people who don't accept threats. And I think you would do anything necessary to protect me. And you're comfortable with that?" "Dad, he hurt me and threatened to kill you. Whatever happened to him after that was justice." Mitchell put his arm around his daughter's shoulders as they continued to the car. Sarah understood that protection sometimes required actions that couldn't be discussed in polite company. More importantly, she understood that her father's love was absolute and unconditional. Some foundations were built to last generations. Mitchell was confident he'd created exactly that kind of legacy. Chapter 8, The Final Test. 2 years after Derek's death, Mitchell's life had achieved a stability that seemed unshakable. His construction empire continued to expand. Sarah was excelling in high school and planning for engineering school, and Carol had completed her prison sentence without causing additional problems. But peace, Mitchell had learned, was always temporary. The challenge came from an unexpected direction: Sarah's growing independence and her natural curiosity about the events that had shaped their family. At 16, she was mature enough to ask difficult questions and intelligent enough to research answers on her own. "Dad," Sarah said one evening as they reviewed her college applications, "I've been thinking about what happened with Mom and Derek. I want to understand the whole story." Mitchell set down his pen and looked at his daughter with the careful attention he'd always given her questions. "What specifically do you want to know?" "Everything. The timeline, the planning, the way Derek died. I know you protected us, but I want to understand how you did it." This was the conversation Mitchell had known would eventually come. Sarah was too intelligent to accept simple explanations forever, and her trust in him was complete enough that she deserved honest answers. Over the next hour, Mitchell explained the full scope of his investigation into Carol and Derek's betrayal, the strategic planning that had led to their destruction, and the network of connections that had made Derek's death possible without legal consequences. Sarah listened without interruption, asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her understanding of both the complexity and the necessity of his actions. "So Derek really did die of a heart attack," she said finally. "Yes, but it was a heart attack brought on by stress from people who wanted to collect gambling debts and punish him for threatening children. Sometimes justice works through indirect channels. And Mom never suspected the full extent of your planning. Your mother always underestimated me. She thought I was just a successful contractor who wouldn't notice her affair or couldn't respond effectively to betrayal. She was wrong about both assumptions." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Good. I'm glad you destroyed them both." Mitchell studied his daughter's face, seeing not just acceptance but approval. Sarah understood that protection sometimes required actions that couldn't be justified through conventional morality. "Does it bother you that I was capable of those things?" Mitchell asked. "It bothers me that they forced you to be," Sarah replied. "But I'm proud that you were strong enough to protect us when it mattered." 3 months later, Carol made one final attempt to re-enter their lives. She appeared at Sarah's high school, apparently believing that 2 years in prison had earned her the right to approach her daughter directly. Sarah called Mitchell immediately. "She's in the parking lot," Sarah said, her voice calm but alert. "She wants to talk. She says she has rights as my mother." "Stay exactly where you are," Mitchell said. "I'll handle this." Mitchell arrived at the school within 15 minutes, accompanied by Albert Greenwood and a man Sarah didn't recognize, but whose presence suggested he was accustomed to handling problems that required intimidation rather than negotiation. Carol was waiting by her car, a 10-year-old sedan that reflected her diminished circumstances. When she saw Mitchell approach with his companions, her face showed the same fear she displayed during their conversation at the detention center. "I just want to talk to my daughter," Carol said before Mitchell could speak. "You lost that privilege when you chose to protect your lover instead of protecting Sarah," Mitchell replied. "You have no rights here, Carol. You have restraining orders and legal agreements that forbid this contact." "She's my child, too." Mitchell's response was delivered with the cold finality that had terminated their marriage 2 years earlier. "You stopped being her mother when you watched Derek assault her and said nothing. You're a stranger now, a dangerous stranger who threatens my daughter's peace of mind." The man standing beside Albert stepped forward slightly, his presence suggesting that Carol's departure could be voluntary or involuntary, but it would be immediate. Carol looked past Mitchell toward the school building, where Sarah was visible through a classroom window. "She's all I have left." "You should have thought about that before you betrayed her trust," Mitchell said. "Leave now, Carol. Don't come back. If you approach Sarah again, you'll discover that some people never get second chances." Carol left without further argument, understanding that her ex-husband's patience was a finite resource she'd already exhausted completely. That evening, Mitchell and Sarah discussed the encounter over dinner at home. "She looked older," Sarah observed. "Sadder. Prison and poverty will do that," Mitchell replied. "But her problems are the result of her choices, not our responsibility." "Do you think she'll try again?" "No. Carol understands consequences now. She knows that threatening our family's peace will result in responses she can't survive." Sarah nodded, satisfied with her father's assessment. "I'm glad you were there today. I didn't want to deal with her manipulation by myself." "You'll never have to deal with threats alone," Mitchell said. "That's what family means. Absolute protection, absolute loyalty, absolute consequences for anyone who threatens what we've built." As they cleaned up after dinner, Mitchell reflected on the test Carol's appearance had represented. Sarah had handled the situation with maturity and intelligence, understanding that some relationships couldn't be repaired and some people couldn't be trusted with second chances. The foundation Mitchell had built for their family was strong enough to withstand any future challenges. Sarah understood the principles that had guided his actions, and she was prepared to apply those same principles in her own life. Some lessons, Mitchell knew, were taught through demonstration rather than explanation. Sarah had learned that protection sometimes required hard choices, and that people who betrayed trust faced consequences that couldn't be negotiated away. The test was complete. The foundation would hold. Chapter 9. Legacy. 5 years after Derek's death, Mitchell Bright stood on the observation deck of the tallest building his company had ever constructed, a 40-story office complex that would anchor downtown development for the next century. At 47, he commanded an empire that stretched across 5 states and employed over 300 people. But his greatest achievement was standing beside him. Sarah, now 19 and in her sophomore year at MIT studying structural engineering, had spent her winter break working alongside Mitchell's crews, learning the practical applications of the theories she studied in Boston. She was brilliant, ambitious, and utterly without illusion about the price of success or the cost of betrayal. "The foundation goes down 80 feet, Sarah said, reviewing the building plans spread across the temporary table they'd set up on the observation deck. "The bedrock analysis shows it'll support twice the current load if we ever need to expand vertically." Mitchell smiled with pride. Sarah understood that every structure began with decisions made underground, in places nobody would see but everyone would depend on. The lesson applied to more than construction. "Your mother contacted my attorney last week," Mitchell said, passing Sarah a legal document. "She wants to request supervised visitation now that you're an adult." Sarah read the document carefully, then set it aside without emotion. "What did you tell him?" "I told him a decision was yours now. You're old enough to choose whether you want any relationship with the woman who watched Derek assault you and try to steal our family's future." Sarah's response was immediate and final. "I choose not to. Carol Pitts made her decision when I was 13 years old. I don't owe her forgiveness or second chances." Mitchell nodded approvingly. Sarah had learned the most important lesson he could teach. Some betrayals were permanent, and some choices couldn't be undone by regret or the passage of time. "What about her financial situation?" Sarah asked. "I heard she's been struggling. Carol works at a grocery store for minimum wage. She lives in a studio apartment and will be paying restitution for Derek's fraud for the next 15 years. Her life is exactly what she earned through her choices." "Good," Sarah said simply. "People should live with the consequences of their decisions." That evening, they had dinner at the same restaurant where Mitchell had proposed to Carol 20 years earlier, and where he and Sarah had celebrated becoming a family of two. The location had come full circle, representing both the end of one foundation and the beginning of another. "I've been thinking about the future," Sarah said as they shared dessert. "After graduation, I want to join Bright Foundations as a junior partner. Eventually, I want to expand into sustainable infrastructure projects, bridges, water systems, buildings that can last for centuries." Mitchell felt a satisfaction deeper than any business success. Sarah understood that true wealth came from building things that outlasted their creators, and true power came from protecting what mattered most. "The company will be yours someday," Mitchell said. "Everything I've built is for you. But you have to understand what that inheritance includes." Sarah met his gaze with the steady confidence that had carried her through every challenge since childhood. "I understand completely. The business, the reputation, the connections, and the responsibility to protect all of it. Some people build things that last. Other people try to destroy what they can't create. Our job is to make sure the builders win. And if someone threatens what we've built, they'll discover that some mistakes have permanent consequences," Sarah replied without hesitation. Mitchell knew his legacy was secure. Sarah possessed the intelligence to expand their empire, the strength to protect it from threats, and the wisdom to understand that some principles couldn't be compromised. As they drove home through the city Mitchell had helped build over 2 decades of honest work, they passed a closed storefront that had once housed Carol's boutique. The space was empty now, its windows covered with newspapers, a monument to the dreams that had died when Carol chose betrayal over loyalty. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mom had made different choices?" Sarah asked. Mitchell considered the question seriously. "Your mother had everything she could want: a successful husband, a beautiful daughter, financial security, and a respected place in the community. She traded all of that for a few months with a man who was planning to rob us and disappear. Some people are incapable of appreciating what they have until they've lost it. And Derek was a predator who targeted families like ours. His death was inevitable, if not from the stress of owing money to dangerous people, then from eventually threatening the wrong person's child. Men like Derek don't die of old age." Sarah nodded, satisfied with her father's analysis. "I'm glad they're both gone from our lives." "They chose to be," Mitchell replied. We just made sure their choices had appropriate consequences. That night, Mitchell sat in his study reviewing architectural plans for projects that would reshape the skyline over the next decade. His empire was stronger than ever. His daughter was prepared to expand it beyond anything he'd imagined, and the threats that had once seemed insurmountable had been eliminated permanently. On his desk, in a frame beside Sarah's latest academic achievements, was a photograph from her graduation day. Sarah in her cap and gown, Mitchell in his best suit, both of them smiling with the confidence of people who understood that success required both vision and the strength to protect what mattered most. Some foundations, Mitchell reflected, were built to support structures that would last for centuries. Others were built to ensure that the people who mattered most would never face threats they couldn't overcome. The choice between those two types of foundations always belonged to the people who decided whether to build or destroy. Mitchell Bright had chosen to build, and his foundation would outlast everything else. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.